Uh, we are starting the event. If you can take your seats, please. Thank you for being here, for doing it better, unpacking evidence from the field and lessons learned for adaptation. This is hosted by Friends of EbA, FIBA, IUCN, RARE, and the Global Grey-Green Infrastructure Community of Practice. My name is Ali Raza Rizvi. I am Head of Climate Change at IUCN. We have all been working on climate adaptation for a long time, and we have mixed results. Many a time things go wrong, they go right. How to make it better? That's the million-dollar question, as we say. So we have a panel of experts who would share with you their lessons learned, what is working, what's not working. As we all know, climate change is a moving target. You prepare the communities, work with them for flood management, and after some years, there would be drought in the area. You do one thing, climate is all the time moving around because it's impacting everything, whatever we do, including indigenous knowledge, including science data, and all that. So what we can do, bringing together experts, looking into science-driven project implementation processes, incorporating local indigenous knowledge, bringing in inclusiveness, gender integration, all these things. These are big asks. And many a time we are project dependent. Projects are defined earlier, then they go into implementation, and by that time things are changed. So we all need to be educated. Implementing agencies, donor, communities, scientists, and we all. So today we try to unpack what is working, what is not working, and if we can learn from each other. So the first presentation is from the field, evidence from the field. Mirella is working with the Mountain Institute in Peru. So over to you, Mirella, to start the proceedings and see what is working in the field in Peru for a project which has been implemented for almost 10 years. So over to you, Mirella.
Thank you, Ali. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the organizers for the invitation. We work in 4 communities in North Yauyos Landscape Reserve in Peru, and I am part of the Instituto de Montaña. So you are looking to some maps here. You have Peru. You have the map of Peru in the central Andes. You'll find North Yauyos Landscape Reserve is a natural protected area, and there are 4 communities that are in the reserve where we worked. Next, please. This is a landscape you can see there, from glaciers already melting up to grasslands, native forests, and crops in the lower parts. So our project mostly developed in the grasslands with the peasant communities. Next, please. These are the stages that we developed to implement EbA measures, ecosystem-based adaptation. Analyze first the feasibility, if it is feasible or not to work in the community, draw a theory of change, the climate risk assessment, the adaptation and ecosystem services map, the design of the EbA measure, and in parallel, monitoring system since the beginning, and mainstreaming and synergy promotion. Next, please. All of these won't be well done if we don't have a good quality of participation, and that's the main topic I would like to talk to you today. Next, please. The EbA measures were designed with the communities together in like a table with 3 legs. One of them, next please, is strengthening local capacities and knowledge. We work with intercultural dialogue between university and local knowledge about practices for grass and water management. Again, participation. Participation is not only calling the people to design together, but also doing together the things the people needs to be done. Next, please. The second leg, institutional and community organization strengthening. We work together with the community in developing a community grass and water management plan from their perspective, what needs to be done. It's not only a consultation, it's a process where capacities are built. And next one is the green-gray infrastructure. Next, please. There are ancestral infrastructure there, and of course, knowledge and capacity. We worked on restoration of ancestral and modern infrastructure and the recovery of technology for expansion and conservation of wetlands and the community management of native grasslands. The measure is the sustainable management of water and native grasslands, but it's supported by these three legs that are very important. Projects cannot only be infrastructure, must be a group of this kind of things. Next, please. Some results are here in the field because we have very little time. Here are the 4 communities. We have water availability in Canchayo. Of course, it has improved. I mean, the infrastructures can be done. It's not a great deal. The great deal is what comes next. Are they being maintained or not? How do we do this? We need to work with the communities from the beginning, from the design, the implementation together. In the Andes, we used to have faenas. There are community works that we work them. So they also make investments. There are more 165 hectares of available grazing area in Miraflores because the project conducted the water to these fields. But what comes next? Always the question. Vicuña management. This is wild animals that are sheared, and its fiber is quite good evaluated, so increases communities' incomes. Or a climatic shelter in Tanta to protect animals. The thing is, okay, projects can do what we intend to do. Next, please. I would like to share this. For example, this is the picture in the over the screen is Miraflores, but it was not only these 165 hectares that were introduced to the rotation system, but all the community map, that is 6,000 and more hectares, were managed with this EbA approach. Why? Because they believed in this change of behavior, because they reduce the pressure in the grasslands with better quality of animals that also increase their yields. So, but this is not only a group of persons that comes and need the target to do an EbA measure. No? We need to conduct an educational process and capacity building that it took quite a lot of time. Next, please. Yeah, here it says the strengthened community was able to implement norms for the use of communal grasslands. So the 6,000 and more communal grasslands were managed with an EbA approach. Next, please. Not to take some time. We are conducting an EbA effectiveness assessment. This is a core, perhaps very summarized results. The IIED has proposed a methodology for assessing effectiveness of EbA in 4 components: the effectiveness for society, for ecosystems, for financial and economic issues, and for political issues. And among the communities, we took 3 of the topics that were mentioned when we did the access assessment. And for example, we have the 4 communities in the columns, and in the lines, we have matters that, for example, awareness and adaptive capacity improve. It's part of the effectiveness for societies, or benefits generated for the community, or local and traditional knowledge included. So we have some signs over there. Of course, there are communities that respond, champions communities. You will see the ad, and very large. When we see the equal signal, it didn't improve a lot. So what happened? There are many things that we need to take in consideration. The same for ecosystems, grazing recovery, grasslands recovery must be, more water available, improve animal quality. So we have, in most of the community, it worked well. In a financial and economic effectiveness, we have increased animal yields, improvement of household economies, and attraction of new projects, investment, one more than other ones, and the same with institutional political capacity. This is, I would like to stress this also because when communities are strengthened, they are capable of doing many things. So you have the results there. I would like to give the floor to Ali and continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirella. We will come back to you. But as you saw, monitoring evaluation is so critical. And then also you must have seen that socio-economic and ecological, all three factors need to go hand in hand. That's where also sometimes, blind spots are. We tend to get attracted towards one thing, either biodiversity or socio-economic, and we know, and we all, in a way, if I can say, believe in sustainable development, but still when it comes to implementation on ground, because it is divided in windows, different funding windows, and that sometimes come in the way of having an integrated approach. We will come back to this point, and M&E is again critical that if you can't monitor, you can't manage it properly. So that these are the 2-3 points we will come back, and we will also come back to you, sharing your experiences, what went wrong. We all love to share our success stories. For the last 5 years, I'm trying to have an event where we can share our failures. To date, I failed in this, but in future, let's keep trying. Okay, now I'll go back to my next speaker. Ariane is Vice President of Global Development at RARE. So, Ariane, you've been engaged in EbA since the very beginning of this concept, and also when these projects started implementing. So 10, 12 years of experience in ecosystem-based adaptation, how you see the world now and previously, and what is lessons learned. Second presentation, please.
Thank you, Ali. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share, as Ali said, lessons learned. So while the presentation still pops up, I will be talking today about a project which actually was exploring how do you integrate ecosystem-based adaptation approaches into small-scale fisheries management. This was built at a time where obviously ecosystem-based adaptation was piloted for the last decade, and now internationally, but even so in the countries we have been working on, was the question like, how do we integrate now adaptation and resilience into the productive sectors, such as fisheries, where many of the countries, especially we are working on, are dependent on. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this is a project funded by the German government, by the International Climate Initiative, who was one of the early donors who actually really embraced the concept of ecosystem-based adaptation, and was done together with partners such as FAO, the Global Island Partnership, and the Micronesia Trust Fund. We worked in 36 communities, or LGUs we call them, across 5 different countries, as you can see here. And we had structured the project in a way to recognize, to link it to my former speaker, to recognize sort of the impact on society, ecosystem, financial resilience, but also how do we build capacity. If you go to the next slide. So the goals of this project was really, as we said, work with the fishers community to not only help them to understand what is the concept of climate change. I mean, if you go to the community level, when we started this project nearly 5 years ago, you know, people are understanding something is changing, the weather is changing, but the concept of climate change obviously wasn't there and is still not, you know, fully embraced, but at least, you know, it's building the capacity to understand what they're dealing with, to then also understand what are the tools they can implement to be better resilient and adapt to the new future, if I say. And one of the things is we were also looking into how do we build back better if there are events which are disruptive of the fishery sector locally. So it's really also strengthen the governance and therefore also the climate readiness. We're working a lot with local governments to establish a co-management of small-scale fisheries locally, and so it's understanding that governance structure, but also building other governance structures like fisheries related organizations. And it's really how to enable this peer-to-peer learning, not only across the 36 communities we've worked in, but also we have a global program in other 10 countries. How do we connect other peers there as well? And then halfway into the project, COVID hit, and so we needed to adapt quite rapidly to the new situation. We weren't able to go to the communities to work with the fishers directly. So we had to think about how does technology help us, but also the International Climate Initiative was really interested to have an add-on grant to this grant to understand how does green recovery works in terms of integrating some of the green recovery finances into micro businesses like the small-scale fishers. And then really for us it was important, how do we build local leadership? And so with that, please go to the next slide. I will share some of the results. So this is how we would establish our managed access and reserve. So we would have a community, as I said, you know, we work with the local government to integrate a co-management approach around small-scale fisheries management. And what we wanted to do is how do we build in our existing managed access and reserve scheme the vulnerability assessment and really integrate more ecosystem-based adaptation approaches to help the communities integrate that and adapt. Next slide, please. So this project had a wide scale. We worked across 5 countries, as I said, in 36 community units across 2,400 square kilometers of coastal waters, but really what is impressive is like the 20,000 direct beneficiaries and how do we really sort of reach that to the local level and make sure that they are actually benefiting of it. To the next slide, please. So some of the key lessons learned, if you go to the next slide, and drivers of successes is that small-scale fisheries actually has a big impact on climate implications. They are, you know, feeling the results, but they can also be the solution. And again, helping them to understand the concept of climate change and work with them to integrate tools in their existing mechanisms they're using, let's say small-scale fisheries management or other measures they're having on the local level was really important. So it's more about not only integrating the concept of ecosystem-based adaptation into sort of what we now more broadly would say the small-scale fisheries sector, but really how they're operating already locally anyway, what governance structures are there we can then tap into to really build out the full potential of what the small-scale fishery sector can also bring to climate adaptation. Next slide, please. And the ecological resilience was really important. So we worked on a tool which based on sort of existing tools around vulnerability assessment, but it's sort of breaking it down so that actually the fishers and the local communities can understand it. And so that was one of the important things as well, and build therefore also this ecological resilience. So how do you connect also the no-take zones and really build sort of that ecological resilience and integrate that into the fisheries management. Next slide, please. And then, as I said, we already had worked around building financial resilience and build savings clubs and others, and increase financial literacy on the ground. and understanding that small-scale fisheries are is not a formalized sector yet. So by helping to get not only them formalized from a financial point of view, but even politically build a constituency was very important. And then when COVID hit in a lot of the countries we worked in, they had actually financial means to channel to the local level, but the small-scale fishery sector wasn't part of it, again, because it wasn't formalized. So in this project, we piloted how can we now use some of the more national-related COVID relief funds to link it to microfinance enterprises and sort of connect to that and then build that into the project, which was really successful. And we're actually, now starting to also explore how do we can get basic social insurance, like life insurance and health insurance to the small-scale fishers, as well as also patriotic insurance. So that's something we are now on top of that project are also trying to figure out how this helps with that area of the financial resilience. So next slide, please. So the traditional management practices, as I said before, are already helpful. And again, it's really important to tap into what's already there, existing, traditional knowledge, but also the traditional practices and really sort of integrate some of the new tools and understanding into that. That was one of the lessons learned as well. Not start something new. On the local level, it's all interconnected, and you have to build with the structure is there, and build also the social cohesion then to really make sure that the community itself is able to build on what they're already doing and further integrate ecosystem-based adaptation practices and what's there. Next slide, please. And it's community-led. I think you already mentioned the participation as a success factor, and it's that, and it's really enabling the community to lead. RARE is a behavioral-centered organization, so that also means that within our work we are empowering the local communities not only to lead on the project itself, but also to lead the community through a pathway of change. So we identify certain behaviors linked to fisheries management, fisheries registration, some policy initiative, to then with some of the social tools we have built to really have a bottom-up, community-led approach to this. And we really felt that this is critical as a success factor as well. Next slide, please. So this project has come to an end. Again, as I said, we are building on this project now to test out some other innovative financial mechanisms like the insurance pieces. But also RARE has the Global Fisheries Program, which operates in over 10 countries globally. So the next step is also not only for us to learn from this in the countries we have operated under this project, but really how do we scale it now to all the other countries we are working in. But we also have seen that this is one of the first project which integrated ecosystem-based adaptation into small-scale fisheries. So we really hope also that this is an opportunity for you to learn, for you to share your experience. You can download the initial report here. We are still sort of reviewing in all of the 5 countries all the results, and the official final report will come in March. But this is sort of gives you a summary as well, and we love to engage with you in a conversation of what you have learned, because again, for us that was also a learning opportunity. And I have to say, in terms of sort of this bottom-up approach, and based on what Ali is also always saying, like, what were some of the things which also went wrong or hasn't worked well? And I think what we have also learned, that this is not only a capacity building journey for our external partners, but even internally for an organization like RARE, who is an expert on behavior change or fisheries, but not so much in the past on sort of adaptation approaches. So it's often when you embrace new concepts, you have to also think about what is your stakeholders inside, and who do you need to capacitate to really embrace new concept into existing measures. With that, thank you, Ali, and everyone for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ariane. Some key messages coming out of this presentation also, that, we many a time in climate change and other, we talk about future. Communities live in here and now. We need to seek what is immediate benefit and how they can see it. Otherwise, future generations and those are outdated. So let's look into something else also which is getting outdated very fast, like business as usual is not working properly in many countries. We have seen recent floods in Germany, Belgium, in America, others, that gray-green infrastructure is critical. We need to work with nature, but also with the built environment. So we are happy that Rod Brown is with us, Director of Gray-Green Infrastructure at Conservation International. So over to you, Rod.
Great, thank you. So yeah, hi, I'm Rod Braun. I'm with Conservation International. I'm the Director of Green-Gray Infrastructure. And what I really want to talk about is sort of how do we accelerate our efforts. I think it's really critical. So I'm going to talk about three things, really. I'm going to kind of build the business case. I'm going to talk about some of the gaps for scaling this work. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of on-the-ground projects as well. So you can go to the next slide, please. Great, thanks. So some of you may have seen this illustration, but the idea is that natural infrastructure, right? Things like mangroves, oyster reefs, coral reefs, and even sand dunes can really protect and provide numerous co-benefits for coastal. Sorry, a little louder. It's hard to hear. Oh, it's not in the back. Oh, it's not back. Okay. Oh, thank you. No. Thought it was like louder. All right. All right. Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, you can go to the next one. We already talked about that. Great. All right. Here's the illustration. So you may have seen this before, right? So you can kind of see wave action coming in. It gets dissipated by some of the vegetation without sort of good natural infrastructure in place, like mangroves, oyster reefs, even coral reefs and sand dunes, right? It can really impact sort of the shore and our assets, and you can see that more likely for flooding to occur. And I would argue that our vulnerabilities are really increasing. We really lost a lot of our natural resources. We've lost something like 85% of our oyster reefs, 20 to 50% of our tidal marshes, 50% of mangroves, and I won't even mention our coral reefs. We know they're in serious decline. So with losing these systems, I only expect our vulnerabilities essentially to increase, especially with climate change, more severe storms, and sort of storm surge. You can go to the next slide. And so this is kind of like building that business case, right? And so there's been a number of studies that talk about really the benefits, right? The benefit costs of natural infrastructure. And you can see coral reefs. For instance, in just the US alone, coral reefs provide something like $1.8 billion in flood protection benefits every year. Mangroves protect the global economy from over $65 billion in damage each year. And we know that salt marshes can provide up to 30% essentially in terms of reduced losses in some areas after we saw Superstorm Sandy in the New York, New Jersey, in the US. And so we've really sort of been building this business case for natural infrastructure. But sort of the next piece, right, and you can go to the next slide, it's really kind of like a paradigm shift, right? We have to start thinking about how do we now, when we do restoration, how do we really optimize it for resilience, right? And so what we're finding is that the natural systems in many cases aren't not enough, right? So we really need to combine it with our natural system with more of an engineered approach, right? Working together. So the idea of green-gray infrastructure is essentially really this combination of both ecosystem restoration and conventional engineering. And here's a diagram of a project that I just recently completed, and it can kind of give you an idea of what that could look like, right? And kind of on a small scale. But the idea is that it's going to deliver climate change resilience and adaptation benefits, really working together. We think it can be cheaper, it can be more effective. You can go to the next slide. And so as part of this, at Conservation International, we worked with a number of other partners. We created this global green-gray community of practice, right, to fill the gaps, essentially, to start scaling this work. And so we have 4 pillars, and you can see them on there with the icons. But the idea is to innovate and pilot, get some pilot projects on the ground. Science and engineering, right? We need to kind of come up with engineering standards to move this work forward. We need global awareness of what this work can bring. And then the idea of acceptance and use. And that kind of, I think about sort of the financial markets, creating sort of the financing mechanisms to do this, right? That cost-benefit analysis. And you go to the next slide. So our community of practice has really grown in the 2 years, essentially. And we have over, I think, 160 member organizations. We have 450 plus individuals. I know that font's really small, but you can just see. And so I urge you to go to our website, just do a search, find this green-gray community of practice, and you can join us. And we do webinars and series, and it's a lot of information sharing. And you can go to the next slide, please. So the key barriers, and so what we found is that it's just people are not familiar with the work, right? What does it look like on the ground, sort of the engineered aspects of it? And so we came up with a practical guide to implementing green-gray infrastructure, and that's available on our website. You can go to the next slide. And really kind of, I mentioned this, sort of that technical knowledge, right, is just we don't have sort of the performance criteria or even the performance standards for this work. So we just came out with a guidance document that looks at mangrove seawall engineering guidance in Guyana, and we think it can be applied more broadly. And you can go to the next. And then we just released this as well. This is kind of this idea that risk-constrained investments, and we released a green-gray infrastructure funding and finance playbook, because we feel like all of these pieces are really critical, right? So from sort of understanding the projects, case studies, essentially engineering standards, and even how do you finance it, right? And so along those lines too, it's even things like insurance, and we're working on a project Risco where we're looking at sort of mangrove insurance and financing with blue carbon. And you can go to the next slide. And we're also working with Caterpillar Foundation to come up with a cost-benefit analysis tool. It's going to be a cloud-based tool where you can actually run your project through it, essentially, and you can look at green-gray versus gray only and look at sort of that return on investment. You can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and that's the one I just talked about. And one more. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. Great. So now I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects really quickly. We probably don't have a lot of time. I want to kind of make up some time here. So just drill down now to the Philippines. So we worked on a project for looking at really kind of like coastal resilience, disaster risk reduction, essentially, in the small island communities. And that we found the need after a serious typhoon hit in 2013 that communities are really impacted, and we wanted to look at some opportunities. You can go to the next slide. And so we focused on some areas and essentially like where was there the greatest coastal risk? Where were there degraded mangroves, right? So where were those resources in need of restoration? And then where also was there limited community capacity, right? So this need, so where they needed essentially that capacity where we could come in and help on disaster risk reduction and even sort of applying some livelihood concepts. So here's a project. You can see one in the Philippines. And some of this stuff can be really low tech, right? And it can be high tech. But here we're using sediment trapping fences or wave attenuation fences, essentially to sort of knock down that wave energy so that we can actually rehabilitate some mangroves that were lost or degraded. And you can see these pictures, and even there's sort of this idea of a living breakwater, which is a beautiful picture you can see there. But the idea is to break down that wave energy and then do some restoration on the backside so that you kind of get this hybrid approach of sort of an engineered feature, but with your kind of your green infrastructure on the backside of it. You can go to the next slide as another example. And here's another one in Tambaliza. And so, in this case, we needed to get the hydrology right, essentially, for mangrove restoration. So in many cases, we find that hydrology is often disconnected, right, from the natural system. A road goes through, a highway, some kind of features that kind of like a linear feature that really kind of disconnects that water flow. So many times you need to go in and really insert sort of these what we call kind of gray features. That might be water control structures, that might be culverts to restore that hydrology. And so we did that here in Tambaliza, and you can see the idea is you get that water flowing, and then it's much more likely that your mangroves actually can be restored. So just to kind of give you a flavor of a couple of different projects, essentially, and then I'll just talk about one last project in Guyana. You can go to the next slide, please. Great. And this is what I talked a little bit about, the mangrove seawall engineering guidance. And you can see in that photo, essentially, what that is a breach, essentially, in their dike system. So in Guyana, most of their coastline is below sea level. And on the backside are really agricultural lands. So you can see that landscape is completely flooded. And those are agricultural lands that have been flooded by seawater, essentially. And so we're looking at some really green-gray hybrid solutions to kind of fix this problem. So it could be things like using some sediment trapping features, right? And then maybe some additional mangroves. We might actually be looking at some land acquisition on some of the agricultural lands to actually just save a little bit save those lands by actually doing some restoration on some of it. Because formerly this area was mostly mangroves historically. So if you actually restore some of the mangroves and use some of this hardened infrastructure along the way, we think we can achieve quite a bit. And you can really see the impact to livelihoods in this area. And Ali, that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. So green infrastructure, this is a fast emerging area. As you can see, there are more than hundreds of partners who are coming together. And again, I'll come back to you also later on, if time permits, that where you're facing more challenges, green sector or the gray sector, to bring them more closer and having effective practices on ground. But now, over to you all. Any questions, reactions, clarifications, or anything? Yes, please. Is there any mic over here? So one question, any other? Two? Okay, let's take these two questions. I have many. Yes, please.
I want to appreciate the wonderful projects that the three of you have presented. And I'm Harrison Noko from Cameroon. And I work a lot with the indigenous and local people to see how indigenous knowledge can be adapted to our recent technologies and not technologies going down to indigenous knowledge, because the buy-in and the adaptability is very, very challenging. My question will go first to the last speaker, and my worry is with respect to the mangroves. I see the approach the technology you are bringing in gray, and my worry was how do you manage to get the community, like she did in her project, to effectively participate and see the need for this for them to effectively engage? Because we all know projects have a lifespan, and at a point it will go away. So how do you engage the community as a sustainable approach? I'm saying this because we are doing some mangrove restoration, and we are faced with serious challenges where there is a lot of erosion, a lot of, you have the invasive palms that are clearing over, you have villages that are already being eroded. So when I saw the technology that you're using, I see it as a resilient approach, and an approach that is also like reclaiming part of the degraded land. And maybe my question will go to Madame, to the second speaker, to see how do you create the linkage, because the aspect of governance, how is government taking this approach? Because unfortunately we are faced with situations where we come to conferences, we have all the good ideas, we have wonderful legislations put in place, but the practice is different. So I want to find out, how do you link this and because I see a program already at the bottom top, but how is the government adapting to get this, because I saw governance in one of your thing, and the aspect of institutional strengthening at the level of the community. How is this transformed or sent towards the national level such that it becomes like an approach that will be adapted to countries and can be replicated to other countries? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This lady at the back.
Thank you so much for your super presentation. I'm Pippa, and I'm from part of the UAE delegation. My question's quite a simple one. What would success look like at this COP and in COPs in the future for this particular topic, particularly NbS adaptation? Party-driven process. What would be great for you and your projects from the COP process? Thank you so much.
Thank you. So first was quite specific, Rod. So if you would take that.
Yeah, great questions, right? Both of you actually, fantastic. So I think the indigenous knowledge piece is really critical. It's really important. But I think from what we've seen, at least in Guyana, I mean other places, but it's climate and these issues really impacting livelihoods, right? So I think it's easier to get that buy-in, right, when the livelihoods are being impacted. So for instance, in Guyana, like the farmers essentially, right, their lands have been inundated by salt water, and you get that salt water ponding in there, and oftentimes it can ruin the lands, right, for their existing crops. So it's really important to get that buy-in, to talk about the solutions, right, I think with that community. So to do that stakeholder engagement is really critical, I think, is a critical piece. And it's the same with the fisher folk, right, and the agricultural folks as well. And so that piece, when it affects their livelihoods, but I think going in really early in the process and getting their input on what the solutions might be, or what they want to really achieve and what kind of outcomes, and then kind of working through those solutions is critical. And I think this pulling in the sort of indigenous knowledge is a critical piece about that too, right? So because folks who live there, right, they typically know best how that system operates and some of those solutions. And so in a case, we had a project in Colombia, in Cispata, Colombia, where we had a sort of a mangrove die-off occurring. And we want essentially the folks that live there and folks that are working the system the longest, they knew where the old tidal creeks where they were, right? What those flowways were like. And so we could go back in and recreate those historic tidal flowways or tidal creeks to bring the flushing back to the mangroves, and then they kind of come back. So it's a great example of using that knowledge of what the system was like to kind of restore it back that way. So I think that's kind of a critical piece.
Yes, Arya?
Yeah, thank you for the both question. I will address the first one. So the governance structure. So on the local level, I want to highlight that really the entry point often is the local government. And we work in communities where mainly the local governments, has heard about us or, is seeing the need to collaborate. So it's really sort of an approach for them to come to us. We are having, through this project, and also facilitated a global network of local mayors who are now, it's called Coastal 500, where we enable the mayors of the communities we are operating in to connect and share practice, and therefore also learn from each other to find other ways of maybe operating. In terms of the governance structure and the enabling conditions then connected to policy, I want to give two examples. One is that in Indonesia, for example, fisheries, was very much focused on indigenous practices and management system, and there wasn't any framework yet to really to enable sort of that to scale in country. And so we tested that on the ground and try to see how not only the local governments can legalize managed EXIF and reserves, but also what is needed then on the national level, which policy is enabling that to really scale. And in Mozambique, it was the other way around. There was actually a law in the making on the national level which enabled local governments to then institutionalize managed EXIF and reserves. So in each country, we are trying to figure out what is the entry point from a policy perspective and governance perspective, and then not trying to either work bottom up or through national law to then make it feasible. In terms of the outcomes for the COP, the second question, I think a lot of conversations are going around nature-based solutions, coming from the Glasgow Pact, and so strengthen that further and see that also here in the text, and linking that to to discussions like this around implementation has really been a step forward. So we hope also that we will see that in the outcomes of this COP. And I think, Ali, you can talk a little bit more about the initiative which will be launched hopefully on Wednesday around nature-based solutions as well, which I think enables the whole discussion about ecosystem-based adaptation and the role of nature in some of the climate solutions to move forward.
Thank you. Ariane mentioned an initiative. We all know everybody is talking about nature-based solutions. But what exactly they are, what they are not, and could there be a solution? Would they be used for greenwashing? All these could be yes and no both, but we do need standards, because this, other than maybe gray-green infrastructure, rarely there are any standards. When we talk about climate change adaptation or climate change, what exactly is a success story? There are standards in different areas, but not overall. So for the first time, IUCN and together with members and partners, nature-based solution standards have been developed where we can look into what is working and how not to let anyone to do greenwashing. Because end of the day, it's critical that first decarbonization, just transition takes place, and then also if we are working and if we survive, then nature-based solutions should be at some standardized way of moving forward, because we know even with 1 degree centigrade rise, more than 10,800 species on which human and economic well-being is dependent, those have become threatened. So 1 degree centigrade, those nature and nature services which are responsible for our well-being, they are threatened. So what to talk about 1.5, and if things go back, we know 1.5 corals will not be able to make their services on which fisheries is dependent. Other studies are still on. So they do need nature, technology and others coming together. I'll come back to that more, but as Ariane said, on the 16th, for the first time, we are trying to work with all members and partners, and COP presidency would be launching an initiative in ACT, which is nature-based solutions partnership, and Germany is going to co-chair it, and many other countries, France, UK, Norway, others, they are coming together, and that will be an attempt to have an integrated approach, because we have learned from our mistakes that, silos are not working. Let's try to break those, and climate and biodiversity crisis need to come together to be jointly tackled. So we are working with all members and partners on that. So we will come back to that more, but on 16th at 12 noon, room 20. If there is no other question, I'll go back to all of you again for, you all mentioned something, which relates, especially Mirella, you and Ariane, behavioral change. We are so much in doing that what we know, and many a time we get hostage to our successes. We don't want to do things which are different. So communities which have been working for so long with a set pattern, how you are working to bring them to have adaptive changes. Because many a time, we say indigenous knowledge, but at times we have seen indigenous knowledge is being outpaced by climate change and its associated challenges. How to bring science, data, indigenous come together. So Mirella, would you start?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ali.
And sorry, very quick, maybe 2-minute intervention.
Okay, thank you. We are, as we design the measure, we bring together science and community people. Of course, when you do the climate risk analysis and look to the future, people doesn't want to imagine what is coming. But in this direction, we could build solutions together. I would like to mention the thing that the people of the audience asked about how to involve government as well in these participatory approaches and how to work on that. Is it real or not? Because, for example, our government in Peru, they work with targets. So people from the offices run along the communities trying to get the targets. And then after the target is reached, then what do they leave in the community? That's a question. And that I can also reply the lady in the back that this adaptation built from the bottom will be one of the main topics to be reached, hopefully.
Thank you. Ariane?
Yeah, to focus on the behavioral side of things is that to highlight that when we when we empower the community to embrace new practices, for example, we break it down through very concrete behavioral changes, because then it becomes also not a huge task they need to tackle, but you break it down for them, and again connect it to things they either haven't done before or do already but need to shift it. And it's really recognizing that while destructive fishing and therefore fishers are sometimes the obstacle, but they can also be the solution if they're more sustainably fish, or if they register, or if they so it's really breaking it down to these behavioral shifts in a way. And then at the same time also recognizing that through this process of a bottom-up approach, you build the social cohesion in a community, which for resilience is also very much important. So how do you not only build new governance structure, but really work with things which already exist, women's group and some other more social structures in a community, and then integrate what you have. And for example, what I meant with, bringing new financial means to the community, it's like linking it now to the finance clubs, for example, which is an institution where they already have to think about shifting the way they manage their finance, but then helping them to have even more so a benefit by in securing them access to very basic social insurance like health insurance and life insurance. And so it's therefore also helping them to build therefore that capacity on the ground, but also help them to understand that it's all interconnected. And the last point around behavior change is also that often you see that it's somewhat also some of the social norms which need to shift, and that is often a difficult discussion to have, because you don't want to feel that you are influencing something which has been established for decades or even centuries, but understanding also that some of these social norms might need to shift, and that you have to help a community to go through that period of change. And it's not a quick one, and it's a very delicate process, but it's a needed process often.
Thank you, Ariane and Mirella. Rod, the work you are promoting is also bringing two sectors together. Do you also see some behavioral challenges? And what side, conservation or gray community?
Wow, that's a really good question. Yeah, behavioral changes are definitely needed. I think it's really on both sides. That's the thing. I think it's working with sort of the community, the engineering and construction, essentially, like those professionals, right, is sort of bringing them along to sort of looking at using nature-based solutions, right, as part of the overall approach, and really combining those. And so it's sort of training them, right, bringing standards, right. I think what happens is we see a lot of examples of these projects being built, but they're really one-off projects. There's one here, there's one there, and they're not really looking at sort of a comprehensive kind of resilience plan and using those. And so I think we need to start sort of developing these standards that become much more adopted more widely. And then I think when you think about the conservation community too, there's this reluctance to use sort of these engineered features, right, that can really, and I think the idea is to optimize our resilience of using both, but so that we get that benefit and all the co-benefits of green infrastructure, like water quality and habitat and those things. But I think you're right. I think it's a behavioral change on the conservation community to accept that approach as well. And I think that we're starting to see in a lot of urbanized areas, especially coastal cities, for example, there's not a lot of real estate to work with, right, in terms of restoration potential. So this green-gray hybrid approach is really absolutely critical and necessary to employ, I think, these kinds of climate adaptation solutions. There's really, in a lot of cases, not many other options. So.
Thank you, Rod. Any other questions? Yes, there are two questions. Hands up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is with regard to the concern or the concern raised by the gentleman on my left. Yeah. Actually, in terms of governance, political commitment is really very important. The political commitment of our local officials, from the national government down to the local government units. Second is the policy should be in place. Second, we need to empower the community. We need to empower the community, and also we need to, the behavioral change campaign, and need to change the mindset of our community. So our recommendation actually is we really need to identify champions from the local government units, champions from the central government, and champions from the community themselves. So we are also into sharing of good practices for replications. So we really encourage all the local government units. I am from the Philippines, actually, and I am very happy and proud also that I am here with me two members of the House of Representatives from the Congress joining me here because we really wanted, to collaborate with the national government, the local government units, the civil society organizations, the private sectors, and especially the one who made the laws, the one who make the laws that will pass, the Congress and the Senate of the Philippines. But we really try to encourage, the communities to really, share their good practices for replications. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experiences, and that's very critical that to empower you need to bring in best practices because we are all learning from each other. Yes, lady, over to you.
I'm from Antigua and Barbuda, and we are going through some very challenging situations now because the government is looking for investments. And we are a tourism island, so we're in high demand, and we have limited space as well. The last investor from India, I guess he didn't come through the multilateral system because there were no standards, there were no safeguards in place. But the government gave him 400 acres, which is our largest wetlands. And we, the people, we protested. We went on the radio. We went to the site with placards. We had marches. And that investor probably didn't realize the value of those lands to us for protection. It's our fishing, breeding ground, birding areas, a cultural spot. Couple months after, he packed up his container, removed all the fencing, and he left. So, the power of local advocacy. But I did hear my Prime Minister say on the radio, we can't eat mangroves. And that statement has offended us so much because if he thinks he's gonna cut our mangroves for development and then try to bring this great infrastructure, we're not gonna go for that. We know these natural ecosystems protect us. Sometimes the hurricane come and really give them a good beating, but after a while they recover. And so, that's the role of us as CSOs. We really have to be like the early warning systems. When we see danger, we have to shout it out. We are not going to let no kind of investment, come and destroy our protection, our livelihood. So I just wanted to share that here with you. I'm kind of a little embarrassed to say that, but we have a role to hold up what we believe in. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this local ownership to any solution or problem that is critical, because unless and until their voices are part of the decision making, nothing would sustain. Sorry, Emily, there's another question. We have 3 minutes, so if you can be 2 minutes. I'm so sorry, we will come back, and then because we have to have maybe just your observation or other, because we are in last 2 minutes. Yeah.
So, thank you very much for organizing the event. Michal Nekvasil on behalf of the Czech Republic and the European Union and Presidency. I do agree with each word that was said here, as I was part of, and I am part of the development assistance. But only one point, if we don't have time. The problem we are talking about is not only a problem of the developing countries. Within what we call developed countries, we have exactly the same one. In most countries of the European Union, the words adaptation to climate change for many mean only walls made of concrete that would protect us from flooding, concrete dams to catch the water. So there is also a paradigm shift needed so that people understand that this is not climate change adaptation. Yeah, climate change adaptation is water retention on the whole surface, regeneration of soils, resilience of forests, halting loss of biodiversity. And the point I want to make is that all that I mentioned now, and that is the conclusion of the recent conference on resilient landscapes, that only if we address all these issues simultaneously, water, soil, forests, biodiversity, only then we'll get to a resilient landscape, and only then we can recover ecosystem services. And I think it applies to all the countries all over the world. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you. This is really good to wrap up the whole thing, what you integrated approaches to problem. That is the key. I'm so sorry, we will be maybe off the stage, we'll get your question. But thank you, Mirella, Ariane, and Rod. It was a good discussion, but as there is no end to these things, we are learning from each other, and we will continue learning from each other. But action is also critical, as you said in the end, critical way, environment and infrastructure all cutting together. It's not the developing countries who are suffering. In the recent past, we have seen developed countries are making the same mistakes. So perhaps we can learn from each other. Thank you very much.